with the sending it out, submitting it, and everybody was always interested, but something always interfered. In the beginning, one publisher said, that was in the early days when no one knew anything about reincarnation, about past life regression. They said, now, if you were hypnotizing somebody famous, like a movie star or something, and writing about that, maybe it would be interesting and we could get somebody to read it. He was going for the big publishers. But as it is, you're working with someone famous, so he didn't know if he could get anyone to even look at it, because he said it was good, but how do we get somebody to look at it? It was a catch-22. And I think a lot of people can identify that if they started out when I did. I was submitting these things in the 80s, and there weren't any New Age stores in the regular bookstores. They had like one shelf of New Age products. There just wasn't anything out there. So I guess I was ahead of my time. And some of the first books that I was submitting, my first one was the one I told last week about my beginnings, which has never been published. It was accepted several times, but it just wasn't time for it. The other one that I kept sending out was my Jesus books, and I'll be speaking about those in the weeks to come also, about information I found out about the missing years and the parts that are not mentioned in the Bible. I have a great deal of information. We'll be covering a lot of these things. But other publishers that I sent my work to, another one said they had been bought out by another company, and 400 employees lost their jobs, so everything was coming to a standstill. They weren't even sure if they could publish the ones they had. So sometimes when you're an aspiring writer, even when you find somebody who wants to publish it, it's not that easy. I went the route to find this out, and I had absolutely everything that could possibly go wrong with a writer I had happen. I even went the route of having an agent, and that didn't work either. He said the same thing. He couldn't get anyone to look at it because I was a nobody. And how do you become a somebody until you get published? Here again, it's a catch-22. But every time this would happen, one of the times, on the same day that they had taken me on like Cinderella at the ball, telling me everything was wonderful, it was going to be printed, it was just, it was going to be a bestseller, et cetera, et cetera. And on that same day that they sent me a letter saying they couldn't get anyone to look at it, my husband had a heart attack that day, and it was like everything was going wrong. Every time this would happen, I had to go back to the beginning and start all over again. I'm saying this so that those writers out there will understand it isn't that easy. It's not that easy to get your foot in the door, to make a beginning on any of this. You have to believe in what you're doing. I always tell people when I speak at writers' conferences, if you really believe in what you are doing and you stick with it, sooner or later somebody else is going to believe in it too, and then you'll be all right. But because if you give up, then you'll never know if you would have succeeded. It is very difficult. This is a very hard business, and in the beginning, the large publishers. But every time something would happen, and I would get the rejections, and it was back to square one to start all over again. It was so hard, and there were times I just felt like just throwing all the manuscripts against the wall and just saying, I just can't do it anymore. It hurts too much. But then I started thinking, what else did I want to do? Was there anything else I wanted to do with my life? I said last week in the last show, my kids were grown. They were leaving home, and I was taking care of my husband in a wheelchair, but still, I didn't have anything for me except my writing and my creativity and the hypnosis. If I stopped, where would I be? And I kept saying, no, I can't. I want to write, even though it's not getting published, it's not going anywhere. It was a compulsion. It was something that I had to do. And then I would sit down and start another book, not knowing if it was ever going to go anywhere, not knowing if it would ever be published, but just because I had to do it. It was a compulsion. It got to the point that I would rather write than eat. I would be fixing supper, and suddenly I would get an idea, and I would just drop the potatoes in the sink and go down to the typewriter. It was a typewriter in those early days. I wrote my first 5 books on a typewriter. And I had to get the information down quickly before it got out of my head. And when I was driving in a car, I would have a notebook in the car, constantly making notes, pulling over to the side of the road and making notes on things that would pop into my mind. And people, especially at writers' conferences, are always asking me, how do you start writing? How do you finish a book? You have to want to write more than you want to eat. It has to be such a compulsion that you cannot not write. That is what makes a writer. If you find something else to do, something else to take up the time, oh, I've got to wash the dishes, I got to iron the clothes, or et cetera, if you let your mundane life get in the way, you will never be a writer. If you say, well, I have work to do, I'm working outside the home, or all the millions of other excuses we can come up with, then you will never be a writer. It has to be an overwhelming, overpowering compulsion. Then it will happen. And you must believe in yourself. You have to have faith. I say faith is believing in something you cannot see. Even though there's no proof it will ever happen, you just know it, you believe it, and you go on with it. That is what makes it happen. I've given lectures on creating your own reality, and you must know what you want. People say, well, I want this or that. Well, it's vague. You have to know in the tiniest detail exactly what it is you want. Because it's the law of the universe, you can create anything that you want in your life. This is the law of the universe. You can have it because we are creators. We can create it out of thought. But once you do it and send it out, you must know exactly what you want. I tell people to fill it full of lots and lots of detail. This makes it become more and more real. As you visualize what you want, you have to be able to hear people saying things. You have to be able to see the pictures, to be able to make it become real. And when you do that, it will become real because it is a law of the universe that these things have to happen. But if you're vague about it, you're going to get anything because they don't know exactly what it is that you want. But then there's another thing to this, too. Once it comes to you, once you have created it, and once it has come into your life, you have a great responsibility. You have to accept that. You can't just suddenly say, well, I don't know if I want it now, or maybe this isn't exactly what I want, and figure you can send it back. It's the same thing as having a baby. You can't suddenly say, well, I don't know if I want it. You can't just undo it. You can't turn it around. So once you have created something, you have a great responsibility to that. That is when you must take care of it. You have to have a responsibility to carry it on. This is one of the reasons I thought mine took so long in materializing. It was my testing time. A time when I could have changed my mind at any time and said, well, okay, I don't know if I can handle, not even really knowing what all was going to happen. I didn't know whether I could handle what was going to come or not. Maybe the powers that be knew more than I did. They knew it was going to take time. Another thing, too, is that the world had to catch up. By the time my first books were published, then there were New Age stores. There was another, increased awareness of metaphysics to where it happened at the right time. Everything has to happen in its correct time, especially when you create something. And the universe knows this time. In the early days, when I was trying to get my books published, and as I said, I kept writing more and more, I had to keep doing it. I know now I was putting a great deal of energy into it. It took 9 years to find the first publisher. And some people say, well, I don't want to wait that long. I don't even want to wait 2 months. We have manuscripts submitted to us now all the time, and sometimes the person will say, we tell them it has to be 6 months before we can even look at the book, because we have so many manuscripts, and this is standard for the industry to take 6 months before you can even look at it and get back with the writer. We get letters from people, and they'll say, I'm not going to want to wait no 6 months. My baby is ready to be born now. I said, well, tough. This is the way it goes. And you have to be prepared to wait and have patience. Everything has to happen in its own time. But in the beginning of all of this, I knew about creating your reality. My one daughter wanted to be a nurse, and she found it very discouraging and very difficult. She was in nursing school. It's like, I don't know if I'm ever going to do it. Is it ever going to happen? I told her to visualize herself in the hospital, wearing the uniform, walking down the hall, doing all the things that a nurse does with patients. And then it will happen. You see the end result. You never worry about how it's going to happen, all the steps in between, because that limits it. Because when you create something, it will happen in ways you could never imagine. It will happen totally opposite from what you could possibly have ever thought about. So if you're trying to think, I have to do this and this and this to make this happen, you are wasting your energy, and you are limiting it as saying this is the only way it can happen. This is the only route that it can take. So when you want to create something, you think about the end result, what it is that you want, the goal you want, whatever it is you want to create. You think about it as already being done. You see it as happening. You see it as real. And then it must happen because it's the law of the universe. And the things that have happened to me have been totally against anything I could have ever imagined to make it happen. So once you give it to them, and I think you understand who I mean by them, your guides, guardian angels, the ones who work with you, they will take it and run with it, and it will happen in ways you can never imagine. They told me one time, and you're going to get used to me saying they said, because I get a lot of my information through the people that I work with. But they said the more difficult the project is to achieve, the longer it will take, because it has to go through so many different people and different channels to make create and become a reality. But in the very beginning, when I was wanting to create this, I kept seeing my books in the bookstores. I saw them on the shelves. I especially saw places like Borders and Barnes & Noble in the mall.